Welcome to ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. My name is Tony DiAugustino. I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire Care 360. In this series of exclusive podcasts, we will meet with tenured and growing leaders in the childcare field, typically operating medium to very large childcare operations from tens of schools to thousands of schools. Our incentive is to learn what has been the path and traits that make outstanding leaders. Join us to glean the sage wisdom from these experienced individuals. Now, let's get started with ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders.
So you opened up a childcare, not an HR department. And here at Inspire Care 360, I think that's where we can be very helpful. A lot of times payroll companies say, oh, we have an HR department, but then you pay an extra large fee and then you get to them and they have to get back to you and so forth and so on. And it really drags. Here with Inspire Care 360, you have immediate access to experts. You also have immediate access to a platform that gives you all the kind of access to policies, procedures, programs like what do I do in case of COBRA, I-9 forms, what to do for family medical leave specific to my state. It is all there, simple and easy at your fingertips. It also allows you to go in and use different types of wizards, tools, from performance management that takes the time to do a performance management down to about a fifth of the time from normally doing it. It is a great bundle of services right at your fingertips, all part of our HR suite.
Welcome to the ECE CEO Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. Today's special guest is Dr. Jason Lody, CEO of Eventus Education. With 20 plus years in school administration, primarily within environments of turnaround and startup, both in the private and public sector, with a doctorate in organizational development with research concentration in substantial school improvement and change leadership. And after having completed his doctorate studies in organizational development, Jason completed a certificate in change leadership at Harvard University through a joint online program. After being a school and district leader, Jason started his own network of preschools outside of Washington, D.C., which he successfully exited by selling to a national school provider. This event prompted the start of Eventus Education, where he now serves as the CEO. Through his work for national school management companies, Jason oversaw school improvement practices and turnaround programs in some of the state's lowest performing public schools, such as Michigan, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Florida, implementing very unique, different type of learning efforts and technologies to greatly improve overall outcomes. Jason, in 2008, worked as a member of the founding team of the Central City Public Charter Schools in a nation first ever Catholic school conversion scaling nationally. Jason is the host of the Early Years Exchange, a podcast by Eventus Education, where each week he explores, sometimes with special guests being his own children, issues and important topics in early childhood education. Speaking on a wide range of topics, the Early Years Exchange connects with parents, teachers, directors, owners, and anyone interested in the exciting and dynamic world of early childhood education. Jason is a frequent speaker at the annual NACCE convention, where he delivers presentations on adaptive leadership and other relevant leadership development topics that support those who are aspiring to be industry leaders. Originally from New Jersey, Jason lives outside of Washington, D.C. with his spouse and his two sons, Zachary and Alexander. Eventus Education is in a growth phase with continued expansion plan through 2026 to 2028. In year one, Eventus grew from 0 to 25 schools across 6 states. Eventus is currently exploring new state expansions beyond the East Coast. Let's welcome Jason Lody. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tony DiAugustino, founder and CEO of Inspire Care 360. And today on our podcast, we have Jason Lody. Jason Lody is the president and CEO of Eventus Education. And we're very happy to have you here today. How are you doing today, Jason?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Well, I was really excited to have you come on board with this. We have obviously had an opportunity to speak together because you have been one of our members for a bit, but I just loved it. We did a webinar, gosh, about several months back, very well received by the audience, super engaged. I was engaged in the conversation. So I really loved it, from where we were coming from. And I thought this would be a great person to have on board. We love just different perspectives. And so let's have at it.
Let's do it.
All right, fantastic. So, as I say, this is just a very laid back conversation. People are downloading these things and having a time and opportunity just to listen to them at will. So one of the things I do like to start with, it is sort of a common question for me, but I like to understand, when you were very young, whether it be in adolescent years or what have you, did you see where you saw yourself possibly being in a leadership role, leading organizations to grow, develop? Did you sort of say, you know what, I have sort of that capacity when I was young? Or was there a different vibe for you when you were really young?
That's a really good question. And I have vivid memories of teaching in my bedroom to my stuffed animals and
Wow.
leading lessons. Uh, I won't say how old I was, but I was older.
Uh-huh.
I had this fascination with teaching. I had this fascination with I had amazing teachers, and maybe that was part of it. I was just drawn to their personalities, the way that they taught, and I wanted to be like them, and I copied their style. And uh, now that the statute of limitations is over, I can share that when I was a student in elementary school, I would steal chalk from the teacher's
Wow.
chalk ledge
A
and bring it
chalk piece.
home because I had a chalkboard in my bedroom and I would use that to teach my stuffed animals. And I always found myself drawn to leading and guiding, whether it was instructionally, I would tutor classmates, and uh, it just drew me to being uh, a lead. Like even when we would have group projects, my teammates or my classmates would by default select me, maybe because they didn't want to do it, but I was
Right.
okay doing it. So I always saw myself in a leadership role in some way, shape, or form, never imposing, but always kind of gravitating towards it. So could I predict decades later we'd be having this podcast and I'd written my dissertation on leadership design and adaptive leadership? No, but it definitely makes sense.
It definitely, now you look back on it, you're like, huh, look at this, where I came from.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So, and this is a little bit of me bouncing around a little bit. You mentioned right up front that you had teachers who were influential on you. Tell me a little bit, if you look back, whether it be elementary, even through, high school, undergrad, what have you, who are one or two of your teachers that stood out and why? What was it that you really gleaned from them and you were like, that made you passionate about this world?
Wow, narrowing it down to one or two is hard. But what I'll do is I will.
Go as many as
I
you
will
want.
yeah. How long do we have? 5 hours?
Exactly.
So I would say that I went to private school from preschool all the way up until when I did my doctoral work was the only time I was in public schools.
Oh, okay.
So I have a lot of nuns and priests and religious brothers who taught me.
Sure.
I would say that in high school, there was this one brother, his name was Brother Benjamin, and he was my history teacher. And what I really enjoyed about his style was twofold. One, he brought learning to life. It was not content delivery. It was an explosive experience, lots of jumping around, lots of energy and bringing energy into what would sometimes be dull topics. And that kept me engaged. And the second part was he really differentiated, and I didn't know what it was then, but now looking back I know he clearly differentiated because the style of instruction that he had not just kept us engaged, but depending on where we were in our learning styles, there was something for everybody in his classroom. and
Sure.
and that was one of the main reasons why he was so popular in school, because people wanted to be in his class where other teachers, everyone was dragging themselves in. And so I
Right.
would say he stands out at the top, and I still keep in touch with him today because that's
Okay.
how influential, impactful that 1 year of history with Brother
Wow.
Benjamin really was for me. And imagine the probably thousands of students who walked in and out of his classroom over the course of his career, the type of experiences they had and positive energy they're bringing into the world today.
Interesting. And so obviously some of the key things of engaging, energetic, those type of things. How do you think you emulate that today yourself with your leadership style?
Well, I'm certainly not dull, right? I think there's if anybody on my team would attest to my presence and my leadership style, I think that they would share that the exuberance of excitement around the work that we're doing. Some people call it passion, but
Yeah.
passion can be expressed in different ways. It could be expressed in a work product, but it can also be expressed in your affect. And that's how I express my passion. That I,
Mhm.
I want people in the same room as me to be just as excited about the work as I am. And you can't get that buy-in and that level of excitement by just talking about it. There has to be an energy that flows from you to everybody in the room. And that's kind of how I deliver my leadership style, because even if we're talking about difficult things, it doesn't have to be humdrum because it
Right.
brings the room down, right?
Yeah.
If we're especially if we're solutions oriented, if we're dealing with a challenge, the goal is to not just wallow in the challenge. It's
Uh-huh.
to emerge from it victorious with a solution in mind, ready to implement and buy into.
You know, so as I think about that and I think about the people listening to our podcast and their desire to ascend, in leadership and learn from this and glean, if you were to pass on some things that, Brother Benjamin passed on to you, and now you are sort of implementing, one day, obviously, one person coming in and sort of being a little bit like not engaged as a leader. And then one day they're like, hey, listen to this podcast. I have to be engaging now.
That's
I have to jump up and down. What would you, if you were coaching
right.
one of these people out there, what would you say if they currently don't feel that energy, but they would love to have that energy? Where would you go with them?
Hmm. I think as Maria von Trapp said, it start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, right? And The Sound of Music, that great
Yeah.
song. But that's true with any coaching process too. And so if I was sitting with that person, I would go back to the beginning, because what I find, especially with leadership today in the 21st century, when you are taking a snapshot of your current existence in your leadership journey, it's it's cyclical, or maybe it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes you have highs, sometimes you have lows. So where were you in the beginning? Because
Mhm.
that's usually where we're at our best and most excited. Maybe our rose-colored glasses are on, we're more idealistic. And then over time, we become jaded, we become defeated, and we ebb and flow in that level of excitement. So where were you at the beginning? How do we get back to that same level of excitement, ready to go? Like when I was a public school principal, I remember every year coming into the orientation for the new school, and you can point out without even speaking to them the brand new principals, the principals who are first year. And then you can also point out the 20-year vets who, shirt untucked, tie all the way down, and it's 8 a.m. The tie's all the way down. They're done for the day already, right? But that energy, somewhere in between that and that,
Yeah.
there's a decline. And
Right.
so where do we get back to that initial momentum of excitement so we can tap into it to bring us to that level of excitement and energy that's conducive to buy-in that we need to be in a leadership role.
You know, and as you talk about that, I think about how we personally try to stay energized as leaders, right?
Mhm.
So there's times I wake up some mornings and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a little rough one. All right. And I have to get on a call with my entire team, and I have to get upbeat. I have to make sure I'm not coming across as heavy-handed, and the things that my mind is saying, lay in.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit for you. What is it for you that allows you to sort of turn yourself towards your team to say, hey, leadership is so important to us. I can't afford not to. I can't afford not to be that leader that they've become to know.
Yeah, it's a really good question because I really don't feel any leader fully understands the level of dependence their team has on all that they bring to the organization. I really don't, because it's impossible to capture and measure. But when you have people on that call or in that room whose energy level is going to be decided by yours,
Yeah.
whose excitement about a project is going to be, benchmarked by yours, whose understanding of their workflow and the expected outcomes will be measured by the clarity of your communication. You have to be operating on all cylinders in order to meet those needs. And sometimes you're just not able to, whether you're ill or other distractions, but tapping into the why.
Mm,
That's something I literally write it down and circle it at the top of my agenda meeting notes or my legal pad to refocus
yeah.
my own mindset so I could remind myself why I'm there. And
Yeah.
it's to rally, it's to engage, it's to delegate, it's to empower. And if I don't remember the why, what is our mission, what's the purpose of us being here, then all it is task completion and
Yeah.
checkbox checking without, substance.
But
So
I
I
love
say
that
return
as
to
a,
the why.
yeah, I love that as a hack. You know what I mean? Like, so, if you just know that if I'm going into a meeting, I just always have to think, why are we doing this meeting and what is the desired outcome?
Mhm.
Why are we doing it? And if we're just doing it to go through the motions, do we even need the meeting? You know?
Right.
So it's a really great perspective. I love that as a hack. That's something I might start, implementing to stay consistent. Because I think, I was just doing a presentation down in New Mexico on leadership, from management to leadership. And the one thing that I was trying to get across to everybody was leadership is not a pinnacle. You didn't get there one day. You always have to work on leadership. And
Mhm.
it beats you up for the fact that sometimes it's easy to drop back to management, telling people what to do, not asking questions, things of that nature. So your like hack of like understand the why of why am I doing this? Why are we as a team doing it? I think that's awesome. So that's great. So going back to some of your other teachers, that's what gave you a fluid feeling about the energy of leadership. If you look back, because I know you said you could go to a lot of teachers, but if you look back at someone else who gave you something else that was distinctive, who might be another educator, teacher, or mentor of you back then? Doesn't even have to be the teacher maybe that you had, but maybe some type of a mentor too.
I had a college mentor who was very abrupt in his delivery. He didn't have time for nonsense. And he was in the leadership studies department. And I remember he said, Jason, you have to remember that the world does not revolve around you. And it hit me because when we assume roles of leadership, a lot of times people are so dependent upon us
Right.
that we feel we are the center of everyone's universe. And then we begin to expect that of our team. And even sometimes it bleeds into our life, where if you're a CEO at work, you come home, your relationship with your spouse might be adjusted because you're the boss outside. And when you come in, it's hard to leave that in the garage or leave that at the front door. And you have to get gently or not so gently reminded by a spouse that, listen, you may be who you are outside, but inside we're co-equals, right? Uh, and so that you get knocked down a few rungs. But in the workplace, especially if you're a founder,
Right.
right? Especially if you're a founder, and that's a whole nother topic. But he reminded me of that because I remember the context. We were talking about political leaders
Hmm.
and local governance, because in that time I went to undergrad in Philadelphia, and there were some local councilmen who were new to their role, but they were making major headlines about power grabs. And now that they were elected, they were they were able to do whatever they wanted, and everybody had to listen to them. And we talked about that a lot because they were real-time examples of how sometimes that leadership goes right to the head, and you bypass the heart, and you don't understand the why anymore, because that's not what it's about. It's about compliance. It's about doing what I say, getting my will and not the will of my constituents. Or, and he said, remember that the world does not revolve around you. And that was I still remember that. And this was in the 90s, early 90s, but it still sticks with me because sometimes I do get a little too arrogant. Like I need to remind myself I don't know everything, and that's why I have a team, and that's why I surround myself with people who are better than me in many ways, so that we can be as successful as we are. And so that is again another mentor who just brought me down to reality that if I get hit by a bus,
Right,
does the world stop?
right. And it likely doesn't, right? So the
Or my
so
world stops, but
yeah,
but like my team, can they go on? Right?
right.
Everything else, that will anybody even know beyond my family? Like the level of interconnectedness we all have in this world, no one person owns a greater share of space than anybody
Yeah.
else.
Well, it's it, you're a rather transparent person, and I really appreciate that about you. When you look at yourself and you say, well, I know where my strengths are, and they're here, leadership and this, and I've done this, where would you say, I'm just not good at this, and I need other people who are at me, my level, above my level, whatever, to do this because it's just not who I am, and I'm not good at it. Do you have any of those things, or are you
Oh
good
yeah. Oh
at?
yeah. Oh yeah. That my entire central office is comprised of folks who are way better at those categories of tasks than I am, because I need their expertise and their focus and their abilities to really bring to life the thoughts and hopes that are in my mind and in my heart for the mission of our organization. So I am great in thought. I am great in strategy, but I can tell you right now, the financial forecasting and creation of projections, I can probably sketch, but
Yeah,
will it be as accurate as I need it to be in order to make strategic and informed decisions? No. So my director of finance is the brains behind the dollar signs and the projections versus actuals. I can read a P&L, I can read a spreadsheet, but it's
right.
the calculations and thinking through all of the various layers that go into projections. I'm I there are a lot of things I'd rather do than that. And
Yeah.
and I think that's the key. What are some things you just don't want to do? Those are things that you definitely should delegate.
Yeah, no, it's so appropriate because a lot of times people in leadership look at it as sometimes just administration gets delegated, but oftentimes you find that there is a lot of leadership qualities that you may be good at, but there may be someone who can actually take it to the next level. And it's your ability to sort of release that, right? Is to say, hey, I'm willing to expose myself to say this other person can bring us and we can get there better, sort of the synergies of two at least, or three.
Exactly.
So with that, when you think about your staff
Mhm.
and you look at recruiting, when you know what you're looking for recruiting, and I know you've probably done a ton of recruiting for directors and things of that nature, but let's say you've been looking for someone to be directly on sort of your leadership team, like a CFO or a controller, or maybe a person over finance or, marketing or what have you. Is there particular qualities that you're looking for when you are recruiting that you're like, here's the baseline that everybody needs to have as to just the discipline they're in?
Hmm. I have a little sign in my office, and I've it's a mantra that we use all throughout central office, and I've shared this with all of our directors, and that's hire slow, fire fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because any position that we hire for, I only want to hire once. So I don't care if it takes too long, as some would say, to hire someone. If they are the right fit, then we're going to wait for that person. We're not going to hire for the sake of hiring. Rarely do those hires ever become long-term successes. But then on the flip side, if someone's not a fit, fire fast so that there's no damage to the organization and you can get somebody better aligned in there. But I'm starting to shift. Like if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd probably have a different answer. I think right now I'm moving more towards mission alignment than skill set,
Mm.
because you can train you can train up, you can skill up,
Wow.
you can level up a skill set, but you can't give passion. You can't teach alignment. If somebody just doesn't believe in the value of early childhood education, but they're great in finance, well, that's not going to be a good fit for us. Skill set, they might be, but how
Right,
are they going to contribute to the mission of our organization if they don't believe in it, if they don't have that alignment to the work that we do?
right.
And so I'm shifting towards mission compatibility, and looking at, okay, they may not have as much experience in this skill set, but that's a doable lift
Right.
for us. Because if we get somebody who's bought into the work that we do, their passion's going to drive their improvement skills wise.
Well, and it sounds like it's someone who mission wise, but probably also connects with your culture. You
Hmm.
know, because if you get a misdirection on culture, you could have a person who's like, yeah, we're going to become this, we're going to grow to the size and all that stuff. But if it's not going to be the way that you and your team have agreed upon on growth, it could be a
Hmm.
real challenge, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
So,
that's why it's important to be in tune with your team, because I also believe, like any relationship, in even in the workplace, you can fall out of alignment within school organizational culture or mission. You can fall out of love with the organization.
right,
To be mindful of how your team is, it might even take a year or two when someone just over time becomes so comfortable that they become so emboldened to disregard some cultural expectations because they're so good at their work. It's not
right.
enough to be good at your work anymore.
Yeah. And so I'm going to go back and push a little bit on one of the things you said, you know, where you talk about, the hire slow, fire quick. When it comes to office staff, makes a ton of sense. How do you deal with the conundrum that we have unique in this childcare industry when it comes to teachers and ratios, when it comes to
Mhm.
hire slow and fire quick? Because quite oftentimes we have to make some very, significant decisions. Do I terminate a toxic teacher right away and then I'm out of ratio and then my director has to spend all day in here while we are not like then recruiting, doing tours, we're not doing all the other work is not getting done, where you have this tendency, which I think is one of the ills of our industry, is we tend to hire people for one of the most sensitive roles that you could have, is taking care of others' most important things in the world or their children. And oftentimes they're hiring warm bodies,
Mhm.
just because they're like, I got to stay in ratio. I got to stay in ratio. I have to do this. And they get into a cycle. And it's so
Yes.
difficult because you're also like, well, this person's toxic. They're not saying the right things. They're good. The parents like them, blah, 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 blah. But I can't fire them today because tomorrow I'm not going to have another person for there. So you get into this real conundrum. How do you work with your team to try to manage through that difficult situation that maybe a number of people are listening to have to deal with daily?
Well, it's a very good point, and it's true. It's true. We
So
wrestle in our minds
it's
about.
just a real life thing,
It
unfortunately.
is. It certainly is. And I was in Georgia this week giving a presentation about this thing, this very topic. And I said to there were directors and owners in the room, and I said, if your interview process starts out with, thank you for coming today, can you start Monday? You know you are in a crisis hiring situation, and
Yeah.
you're in a bad spot. And we've all been there. We've all been like, I need somebody in that room Monday because parents are going to start leaving, or they're going to be concerned. Like it's one of those normal, unfortunate but normal, regular occurrences in the industry across the United States. There are two things that I try to do, and we do it pretty well, but we can get better organizationally. One is to always be hiring, right? We should always be screening. Our bench should be full, ready to pull, because again, we talk about transiency and a lot of moving around in this industry across, the teacher pool. Why not take advantage of that and draw candidates of interest into your orbit? So when you do need to make those adjustments, you're ready to go. And you have to be strategic in that. And that might mean interviewing for somebody that you're going to fire,
Yeah.
and bringing them in and getting them ready so that when that termination does happen, that person is ready to go in. I get it. Sometimes teachers don't show up, and you have to do those short, you know, um, stopgap measures to just
Mhm.
hold things together until. But absent of those immediate hiring needs, we should always be looking to grow and enhance our talent pool. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Eventus is focus on hiring assistant teachers, which can serve in the school as floaters. And that's what we typically do. We bring teachers in as floaters, and that gives us time to see their abilities, to find their sweet spot within the school. Because how many times have we hired a teacher for the twos room, and they go in and they're miserable at twos, but they're excellent at fours, but we don't have
Yeah.
an opening at four, right? So what do? We keep the lousy tier. Like these things are preventable if we bring some folks in as floaters, and it allows us to see where their skill sets are. And maybe that fours teacher needs a break, and bringing her to the twos is exactly what she needs to jumpstart her energy level and to change her environment, to give her a renewed sense of excitement about the work. So that creates the opening in the fours. There are different ways to be creative, but it has to be thought in advance. It has to
Right.
be very much a forward-thinking approach. We should always be thinking about hiring. But what we've been working on is bringing in floaters so that if a teacher does need to exit, we don't have a ratio issue, because we have that floater go right into that classroom. We also do it for growth so that we don't need to say, I'm sorry, I can't enroll you today because I don't have a teacher for you.
Right.
Instead, we can enroll you. Now that room needs another teacher. We take that floater and goes into that classroom.
Very good. Good points on that. One of the things that I gleaned out of there that I'd like you to expand on a little bit is you talked about, you had a teacher in there and she's in the toddler room and it's not going well. Quite oftentimes, what tends to happen with leadership, who tend to still be oftentimes young leadership in childcare, it's not like they have 20 years behind their belt, sometimes they're only 2, 3 years in as a director.
Yeah.
And the mentality they sometimes have is, well, this person isn't working out. I have to fire them. I have to fire them. When that person culturally may be a fit,
Mm-hmm.
talent wise, brightness may be a fit, but they're not fitting in the toddler room. Expand a little bit upon how you tend to look at your people when they might not be a fit somewhere else, and how do you coach your team to take, and reevaluate those kind of people?
Well, I'll add to your list of disconnections one more that is becoming a significant disconnection in a lot of schools that yields higher turnover, and that's generational disconnection. If you have people from different generations,
Yeah.
the younger generations that are now entering the workforce need to be supported in very different ways, need to be communicated to and with in very different ways than other generations. And making that shift where, saying no to one set of teachers in your room might now cause another teacher to quit because they don't like to be told no. So
Right.
so you have to really be adaptive in the way you communicate based on the generations that are staffing your school. But but I think that professional development is so important, and having a topic like communication style, and if you have a multi-site organization, setting communication and support standards for your directors to then use in support of the teachers in their school. Because I think a lot of times teachers feel disconnected from the director because the director's so busy, they don't feel like they get the support or the time or the presence that every teacher would want from a director. So
Right.
how do you build the capacity for the director to support their teachers? We're also realizing that the directors don't have an expansive toolkit of experience to draw from, right? So how do you scaffold? And the key is, and the best part about Inspire Care 360 are like the learning tools that are available online, where you don't have to wait until February, which might be your next professional development day, that
Yeah.
there could be learning modules and training opportunities that can be delivered to your directors or your teachers in small snippets that build their capacity, that builds the support of that director to then support their teachers. So I think that is, in the 21st century, where we have to maximize our effort, is to lean on the tools of technology to put in place some director skill set support that all directors need, regardless of their experience.
Yeah. Well, and for those in the audience, I did not ask him for a plug, but he gave us a wonderful plug. Thank you.
Well,
But
that's what we're doing. We're
yeah,
we're building learning modules because we realize that, that 30-minute time, in between nap and
yeah,
afternoon snack setup, that's a learning opportunity. That
ab-
morning arrival, adding maybe 15 minutes to their schedule before they go into their classroom, that's a learning opportunity. We're trying to find those minimal blocks of time, and we're putting in place what we're calling a power hour once a week, where teachers can go and do, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous engagement with our curriculum director using learning modules that are pre-designed in
yeah,
the ECE University, things like that that capture the minimal time with the maximum impact.
right. And I absolutely love that. Obviously, you're speaking from my heart with that. There is such great opportunity there to take advantage of people's downtime. I don't know how many times I've seen people just looking at TikTok videos and stuff like that, and they're just trying to keep themselves awake, during these transition times. And that's really a little bit of the thought is, how do you just take advantage of a time where they can truly benefit, but see the benefit of it? Thinking about what you talk about technology, where do you think AI is going
Mm.
to be going as it affects our schools, childcare, ECE? Where do you see, glimmers of opportunity, but also glimmers of concern?
I would say that first glimmer of opportunity is in lesson planning and curriculum expansion through the use of AI. Because face it, ECE teachers are not trained to write lesson plans,
Right.
to be thoughtful in the design of, you know, data collection and creating modified lessons based on that data. They're not paid to do it. They don't have the time to do it or the resources. But with a few prompts that might already be embedded in their student learning management system app that they're using, they may be able to create guided lessons with scripts that even the most entry level staff member can execute, which
Absolutely.
benefits our children because now they have a good structured program, provided the teacher has all the resources to implement those lessons. that's a glimmer of hope, because I
Yeah,
think
and
that's a much
I
needed.
think that's actually already there, right? You can,
Mhm.
if you can write these macros with ChatGPT, it'll start pushing out lesson plans according to your styles too.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
what do you have concerns about with where AI might be going as it affects this market?
I already have concerns about AI-driven automations for lead generation, because
Okay.
it doesn't speak a personal voice of that particular school. And I've always flagged automations that are AI generated, as
Yeah.
opposed to taking the time to write your own automations for your leads, because AI, they all sound the same. You go online, you can see an AI generated ad that's
Yeah.
so generic. It has the same font, the same, symbols of clapping signs or whatever it is, stars. It's so generic that it makes this school stand out in a negative way. And
Right.
so much competition now in our industry, we need to really be authentic differentiators.
Yeah.
So Mike, leaning too heavily on AI to have those very important touch points that parents really need to, like you said earlier, entrust us with the most precious resource that they have, which is their children.
Right.
If they're not talking to a human, who are they building a relationship with?
Right. It's a really good point because at the end of the day, our relationships are really all about speed to trust, right? It's all about trust. And if you're engaging with an AI tool, you're investing in something that you're not going to get a return and trust. There
Right.
just is no return on that investment.
Hmm.
When so I did want to touch there. I don't want to spend too much time on the technology side of it, but I do find it is very thoughtful kind of considerations, which leads you into your engagement with your customer, which are those parents, and how you do it. Do you have a general philosophy for your teams, yourself even, as to how you engage and how you treat your families, your prospective families? Because I know obviously everybody wants to treat them wonderful, everybody wants to
Right.
earn the business, everybody wants to keep them for a long time. But do you have any theory behind that that has helped drive you? Because and one thing before I sort of go there, I want to make sure we answer that question. I want to make sure people know that it was mentioned early on in here, but you actually come out of public education system and being a principal and that kind of background. So after this, I want to get into that a little bit, but tell me a little bit how you see your end customer and the way you feel their experience should be.
It's a unique question for us, because for the most part, we acquire operating schools. And I'll just say it, many of the schools that we've acquired have been neglected for a long time. And they come into our network with, you know, under-resourced staff members, understaffed schools, and families who are there for convenience. So building that connectivity with families, family engagement, that is one of our largest hills to climb, because a lot of times families have just been programmed by the normal interactions they had with the previous operators, that I just drop my child off and I pick my child up. That's not enough for us, right? That's not enough. So for prospective families, what we try uh, to really hammer home for our directors to understand is all you have is 10 seconds. The first 10 seconds that a parent enters your building is going to be your deciding factor in their mind. What does your school smell like? What does it look like? Are they greeted? How long do they have to wait? Do they know they're being expected outside of a walk-in? Is everything prepared for them in advance, or do you have to kind of fumble through things? That initial first impression, you only have 10 seconds.
Right.
Beyond that, they're visiting classrooms and all those other things, but that first 10 seconds remains in their mind as they're touring classrooms. So if they've checked out at the beginning because they waited in the rain for 3 minutes for the 50th doorbell push to enter into the building, they may go through the process of walking through the school, but they've probably checked your school off as a no in the back of their mind all through that. So if you end the tour and they have no questions, that's usually not a good sign, right?
Oh,
And so we tell our directors 10 seconds. So what we're trying to do is two things. One, for all new families coming in, resetting that first impression. And then for existing families, educating them about the importance of engagement in the life of their child. That it's not, at Eventus Education, we say we don't own and operate daycares. We own and operate preschools, and there is a difference. And we want to inform parents of what that difference is and how they're expected to be partners in their child's educational journey. Even at the age of infancy, there's learning and development to be done, but it's not the school's responsibility and it's not the parent's responsibility. It's a joint responsibility to grow and develop along with that child. So it's a process of parental information and then hosting small and regular opportunities for parents to come into the classroom to see the difference that we have implemented that should hopefully be different than what they experienced before we came in.
So it's very experiential.
Has to be.
They're having to, you're almost insisting that they have an experience there as to a transaction. So,
That's right.
and I really like the thought behind that. We were talking just a little bit about your background. We didn't start about that at the front of this because I'm sort of all over the place today. But tell us a little bit before you got into this role, where you came from, and then what led you into this role, into the wonderful world of ECE.
So after my undergrad, I started teaching math and science in middle school. And then I was offered an opportunity to become an assistant principal. I was at the time working for my master's in school administration, so I qualified and applied and was hired as an assistant principal. And shortly thereafter, the principal quit, and then I became the principal. And so I was thrown into leadership rather quickly, but willingly. I wasn't forced into it, but I was presented with a great opportunity. And so I was an elementary school principal, K-8, for many years. And I found that my kindergartners were always divided into two groups when we would see them in their first weeks. And we can tell which group came from preschools and which group stayed with grandma or auntie or mom or somebody else. Because they always got sick first because their preschool didn't give them the
Right.
germs to
Didn't
build up
build
their
any
immune system.
tolerance.
And two, their skill set, their ability to follow routines, their understanding of large groups, it was so overwhelming that they would crash and burn within the first few hours. And their process of integration into a traditional school setting was much longer and steeper. And so it was always a data point that we were collecting year after year after year to prepare ourselves.
Yeah.
And then when I had the opportunity with an empty classroom for a school I was placed at, it was a really large building. And so I had an empty classroom and I proposed opening a pre-K program. And I was granted that ability and we filled it right away. And when we looked at year two, really, we didn't have any space in kindergarten except for anybody who was in our pre-K. So all those pre-K risers into kindergarten, we had a successful first day of school. There was no crying. There were no tantrums because they had spent the whole year preparing and getting it all out of their system. So when they came into kindergarten, where the academic level and intentionality really shot through the roof, they were ready. And it became a pilot without calling it a pilot. But had I not known at the time that the central office was watching our success to see if this is something they could replicate. And then they started replicating it throughout the district. Yeah. So I think that that experience brought me and always remained with me about how we could be proactive in preparing our students for school success. So when I left the public schools and retired, I was still too young. I like to say I was too young for a rocking chair and too old for TikTok. So I had to do something else. So I was looking for a preschool for my now oldest son, and I couldn't find any that I, as an educator, I was comfortable with. So I started my own. And
Right.
that grew into a portfolio that I ended up exiting from. But I created this preschool design that focused on school readiness, where a lot of the people around us were focusing on play, focusing on daycare, home care. All of those are great. But for me, as an educator, I wanted my son to be ready when he aged out and went into full-time kindergarten, so that,
Sure.
8 hours in a classroom wasn't going to be his first experience when he was 5. I wanted
Right.
a structured curricular-based program to get him ready for caring and sharing and routines and academics for that transition. And that's where my love of ECE began, because I wasn't the only dad wanting that, clearly.
Huh. Yeah.
And I grew to make that my focus, because I then saw, even in the earlier years, how well children adapted to the structure and how happy parents were with their children adapting to that structure. And, then they come back and say how successful they were in kindergarten and first grade and second grade as a result of their experience with us.
Interesting. And I think it's a good mantra as to, telling us how you sort of got involved in the whole preschool world and then sort of how you started to create almost your brand experience. You said so you took a leap of faith, you went in, you started schools, you bundle a few together, you sold that business off, and now you're doing it over again.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
I'm crazy. Well, some people call it passion, right? And I'm
There
passionate.
you
I'm
go.
passionate. Now, here's my thing. And my dad taught me this. My dad taught me that there is no reward without risk.
Right.
So when opportunities are presented to you, be strategic in your response to them, but don't immediately disregard them because of the risk.
Right.
And when I exited, it was only 3 or 4 months after that I was approached by a an investment firm that wanted to originally scale the brand that I was building here outside of Washington, D.C. But I had already moved forward with that acquisition process, so I could not commit to that. So they called me back a few months after, say, well, why don't we just do something different? And
Okay.
that's where Eventus came into play. And it's been a journey, I can tell you that. And you have been along that journey with me, so
Yeah.
that it's a labor of love,
Uh-huh.
but it's not for the faint of heart. This is not a high margin industry where you just sit back and watch that passive income. There's no such thing as passive income unless you're the landlord. So
Yeah.
if you're the operator, it is a lot of a lot of problems, a lot of uh, challenges to solve, a lot of planning, but then there's also a tremendous amount of reward, tremendous amount of joy in providing service, particularly in communities that may be underserved. Like,
Yeah.
how amazing is that? What opportunity that is to impact hundreds and hundreds of lives of children who otherwise would be at home watching TV potentially.
Right, right. I get a little bit of your passion of like why you are in this industry. What makes it for you? It sounds like, you're growing up through the public school system, with your leadership there and then coming here. And you really have a bit of a passion as to how do we go to market? Why are we different? And it really is sort of comes back to in a way like what you had in mind for your son. This is what I wanted for my son, and I saw it as a great experience, and it sort of worked. What do you find to be the most challenging elements of our industry?
I think that one of the most challenging elements is being undervalued by legislation. I feel that there are a lot of fingers pointed at ECE and not a lot of support. And I'm not talking about the COVID money and the federal support
Right,
in times of extreme disaster and crisis. I'm not
right.
talking about that, because people can then counter me by saying, well, what about all those hundreds of millions of dollars that flow to early childhood education? That's gone.
Yeah, that's been gone.
It's been gone. Right, exactly. And not everybody got it, but it's
Yeah,
gone. Now, the fast forward to today, ECE is undervalued. It's still seen as daycare and not impactful, even though all the 0 to 3 research shows the significant impact ECE has on the development of children and their readiness for school and life. And that really frustrates me because we still have teachers. And again, in my presentation this week, I showed some Bureau of Labor statistics that showed that early childhood educators are paid less nationally, paid less than parking attendants in the United States. And parking attendants are paid less than people who work at Walmart and Costco and other large companies like that in the service industry, which is why we have teachers who leave us to go work at Walmart or they work at Costco because they can and they need to. We don't have the financial support from legislation to really empower our schools to be as successful as they can be by giving the teachers the pay that they're worth. Because we can't charge the tuition that we need to charge to make those teachers paid for the professional work that we expect them to do.
Right. And that is the rub, right? The rub is it's difficult to get across to parents. The reason I have to raise your prices is because I have to be able to pay a wage to keep my teachers to understand this is a career. This is not a waypoint, you know? And I think it's interesting because I was just mentioning I was at the New Mexico Association conference, and New Mexico just had it was interesting when I was landing, they just approved that the state of New Mexico is going to pay 100% for
I
parent
saw
child
that.
care.
That's amazing.
Now, it's amazing, but then I'm like, so we both know there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I started going, well, I wonder what that amount is, because if you're charging, and let's just do some even numbers here. You charge $10,000 a year for one tuition, which is really low for anybody these days. Okay. But then the state says, hey, we're going to give you $5,000 a month per child, and we're going to pay for it. And you're like, well, I still can't pay for anything else. I can't get my business. Well, hey, listen, they get free childcare. So then what happens is you're not going to have schools of quality. Quality is going to start ratcheting down because you're going to just trying to fit into that little box that the state's giving you. So I always think we have to be thoughtful of those amazing things that they have. But one of the things that also got them there, if I understood in that conference I was at, was they were talking to legislators and they said, did you realize, and I think this was New Mexico, could have been Florida, I'm not sure. They said, do you realize for abandoned pets that are found on the street that are brought into a care facility for pets, they're getting more state funding for that than they do for children? And they were like, really? We had no idea. Because I think oftentimes on that, bully pulpit of childcare, every politician, doesn't matter what side of the aisle, childcare this, childcare that. But then when it comes time to it, we're holding a bag of feathers, oftentimes. So it is a dual-edged sword. I think it's amazing where they're trying to go, but making it happen in a way that can really inspire the quality, I think, is critical too. So my 2 cents. Sorry.
No, I love it. And there's no, yeah, right. There's no such thing as a free ride. And anytime money comes from a government agency, there's always strings. So let's say we give you this money, but your teacher quality, your teachers have to have CDAs and they have to have, associate's degree at minimums. Now who's going to pay for that? So
Right.
it creates these untenable, like the money's there and you can't kind of reach it. You can't, but you just can't grab it. It's so close. You just can't grab it. It's like, oh, what a tease. What a tease. Yeah, it sounds good on paper. I get it.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, we already blew through an hour.
Oh, goodness.
We went through an hour that quick. So I do have one last question for you, and then what I'd like you to explain to our audience a little bit is more about Eventus and where you're going as an organization. And anybody wants to participate to become part of the Eventus family or what have you, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. When you look at the future of where childcare is going, is there anything in your mind saying, outside of the fact that we need government support, we need new wages or additional wages. Is there anything that you're like, these are musts that we need to have in childcare, that we need to have going forward?
I'm going to say two things. One of them is controversial. One of them is, I think, a no-brainer. One is we need more support to provide not just living wages for our teams, but professional wages for the professional work we expect them to do and we hold them accountable for doing. That's the first thing. The second thing is the controversial one, and that is we need more independent centers. Independent centers are the differentiators, if you ask me, when it comes to early childhood education. I have nothing against national brands. I have nothing against large corporations. I don't. But the local identity and the community-based presence that independent centers have, they're going away every single day.
Yeah.
And it radically changes the connection that those schools can make with the local community when they are operated by, shareholders that are all over the country. And
Yeah.
it waters down our industry, and I think it diminishes quality, in my personal opinion.
You know what? I think it's a great point of view. And just to relate it, it's sort of like the independent restaurants, right? The mom and pop restaurants, that amazing Italian restaurant, that great Chinese restaurant, that amazing Korean restaurant. And you just come into a new town these days, and oftentimes all you see is chain restaurant after chain restaurant. When I go to a new town, I actually try to find that independent restaurant because I can have that chain anywhere.
That's
But
right.
that experience, that uniqueness, that caring. So I think you're on to something. I don't think that's controversial, actually. I think it's important.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate you bringing that up. That's a very good point, Jason. And Jason, since we are already at our time, tell us a little bit about Eventus Education. What is sort of your vision, your mission a bit as to, if someone wanted to participate and become part of the Eventus family or something?
Sure. Eventus Education, we are a national network of preschools. We own and operate preschools, and we are focusing on maintaining local identity and ownership of schools. And the way that we do that is not by cookie cuttering them and normalizing all the schools so that they all look the same or sound the same. We don't change school names unless we're required to by the seller. We keep everybody in place. Stability is important to us, as well as community-based engagement. So we call ourselves a network because while we might provide efficiencies for all of our schools like payroll and curriculum and
Sure.
training
The back
support, the
office.
directors at each of our schools are empowered to be the owners of the operations at their school. They know what their community needs best, and we want to support them in delivering that. We have about 25 schools right now active or in the pipeline, and we are concentrated in 7 states right now across the East Coast, with acquisitions in conversation in other states as well. If somebody is interested in joining us or considering exiting, they can contact me directly at eventuseducation.com, which is our website. We also have a weekly podcast called the Early Years Exchange that I host, and we talk about things directors, owners, and investors might want to know about around the emerging trends of early childhood education and some of the joys, challenges, and pitfalls of the industry.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take some of those things and those links, and we're going to bundle into this podcast. So when this is released, people will have access to some of those links for you. So,
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
well, hey, listen, Jason, I want to thank you. By the way, just for those of you out here, we had a time to tape this thing and I messed up the whole time before. I don't mind falling on the sword. So I think about his generosity and his willingness to go, oh, no, okay, come on, let's go do it. So that was great. So this is Tony DiAugustino. I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire Care 360, and this is for ECE CEO Biography, Sage Wisdom
for childcare leaders. And we are so glad and happy that you joined us today. We get so much out of your participation in coming, and hopefully you glean something out of these. This is what it's for, is high tides raise all ships in this industry. It's a small industry, and our objective is to really help one another get to the next level because of the children, but also because of the staff, because of the families, because of yourself. So thank you so much for joining us. We will talk to you very soon. Have a wonderful day and take care.
You have been listening to ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. Thank you very much for listening. We're greatly appreciative of your time. We will continue to produce these programs on an ongoing basis, and please hit the download button and subscribe to our podcast so you do not miss an episode. Thank you very much and hope you have a wonderful day.